My son didn't pick up the phone for 2 weeks, so I decided to stop by his house quietly. But when I got there, something shifted under my grandson's bed. When the police lifted it up, what we saw left all of us completely stunned because I still remember the day my world shattered, when I found my grandson Matthew clinging to an empty water bottle under his bed, his eyes hollow and lifeless. That chilling silence screamed louder than any scream, telling me something truly horrific had happened to my son, Daniel. You know, sometimes a journey isn't just about covering distance. It's about walking straight into your worst nightmare. That's how it felt taking that first bus to Chicago. 3 hours of absolute silence. My eyes glued to the window, my heart a tight, suffocating knot in my chest. Even holding the ticket, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. By the time I got off at the main terminal, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long, unsettling shadows. I practically ran towards Daniel's gated community, a path I'd walked countless times to visit him and my precious grandson Matthew. But this time, every single step felt heavy, like lead weights dragging me into a horror story. When I finally stood before that familiar wooden door, I started with gentle knocks, then louder, desperate pounding. "Daniel, Matthew!" I shouted, my voice cracking in the cold air, completely swallowed by the silence. No answer. Just on a whim, I tried the doorknob. To my horror, it creaked open. Unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs 1,000 beats a minute. Daniel never left the door unlocked. He was so meticulous, so careful, especially with Matthew home. I pushed it open slowly, holding my breath, terrified that the slightest sound might shatter whatever fragile reality I was clinging to. And then I saw it. The living room was a war zone. The sofa was violently shoved out of place like a rage-fueled tantrum. On the floor, a coffee mug lay in 1,000 jagged pieces, white porcelain mixed with a dark, dried coffee stain. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to step over it, careful not to crunch glass underfoot. The kitchen was just as bad. A tipped water cooler, empty plastic bottles scattered everywhere, uncapped, as if someone had chugged them down in a frantic panic. The whole house reeked of dampness, a heavy, suffocating silence that sent chills crawling up my spine. Dragging my feet, each step feeling like I was pulling a stone, I went upstairs. My own heartbeat was deafening in my ears. Daniel's home office? Empty. His bedroom? Empty too. The bed was still made, eerily untouched, no sign of life whatsoever. Finally, I reached Matthew's room. "Matthew, where are you, sweetie?" My voice was hoarse, desperate. Still nothing. I stood in the middle of his room, just looking at his toys, the Lego blocks, his worn-out teddy bear. My heart was breaking into 1,000,000 pieces. Then a tiny sound. From under the bed. A soft scraping, like a plastic bottle rolling on the hardwood floor. I froze. A literal chill shot down my entire back. My heart, it was pounding so hard I thought it would just explode out of my chest. There was something under there. I wanted to bend down to see, but my feet were glued to the floor. I stumbled back, grabbing the edge of a desk just to keep from falling apart. "Matthew?" I called again, my voice barely a whisper. Only silence answered, save for that faint, clear sound. It felt like a warning. Pure panic took over. I bolted from the house, my hand shaking so badly I had to dial 911 3 times to get it right. "My son is missing. I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks." I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking. There's a strange noise under my grandson's bed. I was stammering, not even making sense, just knowing I needed help. And fast. Less than 10 minutes later, those flashing red and blue lights illuminated the window. I practically dragged the 2 police officers to Matthew's room, pointing with a trembling finger at the bed. "Under there," I whispered, not daring to look. A young, tall officer knelt down, his voice firm. "Is anyone under there?" A heavy silence, so thick you could taste it, filled the room. Then, without a word, both officers lifted the bed in one swift motion. And there he was. Matthew, my sweet grandson, curled up in a tiny ball. He was so thin, his hair matted with sweat, his clothes filthy and reeking of something sour. He clutched an empty water bottle, his eyes wide open, expressionless, staring into a world I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I stood there, utterly paralyzed, feeling my heart simply stop. The officers were in shock too, silent. I fell to my knees, wanting nothing more than to scoop him up, but my hands were shaking so violently I was terrified I'd hurt him. "Matthew, my boy," I whispered, tears gushing now. He didn't respond. He just stayed there, clinging to that bottle like it was the only thing keeping him alive. I knew even then this wasn't just a discovery. This was the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. My name is Helen, I'm 61, and I live alone in a quiet town, just a short drive from the big city. This whole nightmare, it actually started 2 eternal weeks before I found Matthew. It began with a knot in my stomach that just kept tightening. It was a late October morning, and I called Daniel, just like I always did. Sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, I listened to it ring. And ring, and ring until it finally went to voicemail. No answer. I sent him a quick text. Are you okay, son? But that message just sat there, stubbornly undelivered. Something felt off, but I tried to push it down. He's busy, I told myself. Battery probably died, no signal. Daniel was a fiercely independent man, always doing his own thing. I tried to calm myself, but that tiny spark of worry slowly, inexorably grew into a consuming fire. Day after day, the silence was deafening. I called at ridiculous hours. Dawn, late at night, even during his lunch break, when I knew he'd usually pick up. Nothing. Just endless rings. I left voicemails, my voice trembling more with each one. Daniel, where are you? Please call me, I'm so worried. But they just vanished into the void, never acknowledged. That's when I started picturing the worst. Daniel wasn't the type to just disappear. He called me every single week, told me about work, about Matthew, about their perfectly normal life. This silence? It wasn't him. Not at all. By the 5th day, I was unraveling. The anxiety was eating me alive. I tried his landline, just desperate to hear any voice, even Matthew's, my 8-year-old who loved telling me about school. But the phone just rang and rang in an empty house. I finally hung up, defeated. Then I remembered the messaging app Matthew used. Sweetie, where are you? Call Grandma, I sent it. My heart sank when the read receipt never appeared. Matthew, young as he was, knew his way around a phone, and he absolutely adored his grandma. He always replied immediately. Desperate, I started calling Daniel's friends, his co-workers. Their voices were all hesitant, surprised. Haven't seen Daniel all week, one co-worker told me. Thought he was on vacation. A close friend said, last we talked was last month. He said work was crazy. Nobody knew a thing. The more I asked, the deeper I felt I was sinking into this terrifying void of unanswered questions. Daniel was a dedicated father, a caring son. Something had to have happened. On the 10th day, I just couldn't bear the waiting anymore. I started calling his neighbors, anyone whose number I had. Their voices were full of pity, full of sighs. An elderly woman across the street from Daniel's house mentioned something chilling. She said that last week, on the night of a huge storm, she saw a light in Daniel's house suddenly flicker on and then off. I just thought the boy turned on the light to go to bed, she said, but her voice was trembling, like she felt the wrongness of it too. Her words stabbed my heart. The night of the storm. A light on, then off. I knew it then. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. 2 weeks. 2 agonizing weeks passed. All my efforts, all my desperate calls, completely in vain. No message, no call, not a single sign. Sleep became a distant memory. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, my mind conjuring every horrific scenario. Accident? Kidnapping? Had he just left? No, Daniel would never leave Matthew. Matthew was his entire world. And Matthew, my grandson, where was he? The more I thought, the more I couldn't breathe. I couldn't just sit there anymore. Not for another minute. So I decided I had to go to Daniel's house. And what I found there, it only magnified my anguish 1,000 times over. Now I'm sitting here in the sterile, dim light of a hospital room, my hands clenched so tightly around the chair's edge I think my knuckles might break. Matthew was so small, so lost in that huge hospital bed, his little body swallowed by the white sheets. A police officer had carried him out of that cold, silent house, and I'd just run after them, a soulless shadow, desperate to stay close. My hands trembled when I finally touched him, wanting to hold him tight, but so terrified I might squeeze too hard that I might hurt him even more. He didn't react. Not a blink, not a sigh. Just his tiny hands clutching that empty water bottle like it was his only lifeline. The patrol car screamed through the dark city streets, its siren a haunting echo in the night. I sat right next to Matthew, fanning him with a crumpled piece of paper I'd found back at the house, gently patting his back. Matthew, I whispered, my voice shattered. Grandma's here! But he remained utterly still, a living statue, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. What had happened to my grandson? What had happened to Daniel? That trashed house, those empty bottles, and the terrifying noise under the bed. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake from. At the hospital, they rushed Matthew straight to the emergency room. I was stuck outside, my hands pressed against the cold glass door, watching doctors and nurses swarm around him. The metallic hum of machines blended with their urgent, hushed voices. No external injuries, severe malnutrition, severe dehydration, signs of psychological trauma. Each word was a fresh stab to my heart. Psychological trauma. My 8-year-old grandson, the boy who used to smile brighter than the morning sun, was now a fragile, dry leaf, ready to crumble at any moment. A little later, the doctor finally let me in. Matthew was already hooked up to an IV, a thin tube disappearing into his skinny arm. His eyes were still open, but they weren't looking at me. They were focused on some distant, unseen place, a place I couldn't reach. I took his cold little hand. "Matthew, it's me, Grandma." "Wake up, honey. Please say something." But he didn't respond. Didn't even blink. I sat beside him and the tears just started to fall. I remembered him as a toddler, running around my yard, laughing, his head thrown back, begging me for stories about my childhood. Now that bright laugh was gone, replaced by a terrifying silence. It was like he'd locked his soul away. The police arrived then, with their notebooks and their endless questions. A young officer, serious-faced, sat beside me. "Ma'am, when was your last contact with Mr. Daniel?" I shook my head, a thick lump forming in my throat. 2 weeks, I whispered, my voice trembling. I called him, messaged him, tried everything, but nothing. Daniel would never do this. He always called at least once a week. The officer scribbled notes, nodding, then turned to the doctor for Matthew's condition. They spoke in hushed tones, but I heard it. The victim shows no life-threatening injuries, but he's in a state of severe post-traumatic shock. A stone crushed my chest. Post-traumatic shock. What horror had Matthew endured to end up like this? I wanted to scream for answers, but the officer just kept writing. "We're opening a missing person case for Mr. Daniel. Could you come to the precinct to give a full statement?" I shook my head, almost begging, "Please, let me stay with my grandson. I can't leave him alone right now." They agreed, their eyes filled with a shared concern, as if they, too, felt the dark shadow hanging over my family. That whole night, I just sat there. I watched Matthew tremble in his sleep, his little body jerking in fits. He clutched that empty water bottle even tighter, as if someone might try to snatch it away. Sweat drenched his forehead, soaking the pillow. Sometimes he'd jolt awake, eyes wide with terror, but he never said a word. Just stared at me with that empty gaze. I'd wipe his forehead with a small towel, my hand shaking uncontrollably. "Grandma's here with you," I'd whisper, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. The doctor, a kind-faced, middle-aged woman, came to check on him. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Ma'am, the boy needs time. He's been through immense shock. Be patient. He'll tell us what happened, you'll see." I nodded, but inside I felt this crushing weight. Patience? How could I be patient when Daniel was still missing, and Matthew was just a shell of himself? I spent that entire night by his bedside, holding his frail hand, listening to his weak, shallow breaths. I remembered the last time I'd spoken to Daniel. His voice had sounded tired, but he'd still managed a small laugh. "Mom, I'm fine. Work's just been a bit heavy." I hadn't pressed him. I hadn't realized how heavy. Now I blamed myself. If I'd paid more attention, if I'd called sooner, would things be different? 2 more days crawled by. I didn't leave Matthew's side, not for a second. It felt like if I took my eyes off him, he might just disappear. He was still there, so small, so fragile, his thin hands now clutching a teddy bear a kind nurse had given him. I tried to feed him broth, spoon by slow spoonful. "Eat, Matthew, sweetie, get strong so you can come home with Grandma." My voice trembled, but he barely swallowed a couple of mouthfuls before clamping his mouth shut, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Every night the nightmares came. He'd sit up suddenly, mouth open as if to scream, but no sound would come out. I'd hold him, rock him, sing the lullaby I used to sing to Daniel when he was a baby. But Matthew would just tremble, sweat drenching his forehead. My hand would shake so violently trying to wipe him, the washcloth would fall. I asked for a psychologist, a young woman with a sweet, gentle voice. She sat with him, held his hand, asked soft questions. "Matthew, do you want to tell me about your dad? Or anything you saw?" But he just hugged his teddy bear tighter, eyes on the floor, silent. Standing to the side, my heart was in my throat. "Will he ever talk again, doctor?" I almost pleaded. The psychologist looked at me with compassion. "Ma'am, he needs time. The shock was too great for a child, but I'm sure he will open up. It's just not the right time yet?" I nodded, but calm was a foreign country to me. Time? I didn't know how much time I had left. Daniel was still missing, and every passing day was a fresh torture of anguish and pain. On the third morning, as I gently wiped Matthew's thin cheeks, trying to coax a smile with an old story about Daniel, how silly he was as a boy, trying to tape a broken vase back together, I told him, "Your dad was so silly, Matthew, but he loved you more than anything." He didn't respond, but I saw his tiny fingers clench around the teddy bear. He was clinging. Just as I was about to continue, my purse vibrated. Police precinct. My heart leaped into my throat. A cold dread washed over me. I fumbled for the phone, my hand shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. The detective's voice, usually so calm, was now grave. "Mrs. Helen, I need you to prepare yourself. We just used luminol at Mr. Daniel's house, and we found a very large amount of blood in the living room." My ears went numb. The world went silent. The washcloth slipped from my hand. I couldn't even feel my fingers. "Blood?" I managed to repeat, my voice a broken whisper. The detective continued, each word a fresh stab wound. "It's very likely we're dealing with a homicide. The scene is cordoned off pending DNA results." I could barely process it. Homicide. Daniel. Then Matthew tugged hard on my sleeve. I turned, and his eyes, red and brimming with tears, locked onto mine. It was as if he'd heard everything. And then, after days of agonizing silence, he shattered. He burst into the most heartbreaking cry I'd ever heard, a weak, pain-filled scream that tore through the hospital room. "Dad, he's dead." My own world collapsed. I fell back into the chair, pulling him into my arms, tears streaming down my face. "No, Matthew. No, it's not like that." But even as I said it, I didn't believe my own words. His few broken syllables were a hammer blow to my heart. The detective, still on the phone, heard his cries. "Ma'am, calm down. We're on our way to the hospital right now to take an initial statement." "Please, don't move." I couldn't answer. I just clung to Matthew, letting my tears soak his clothes. Nurses and doctors rushed in, alerted by the raw pain. A young nurse knelt, her hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Helen, please let us care for him." But I just shook my head, holding Matthew even tighter. "No, I have to be here. I can't leave him. Not after he just said those horrible words." They gave Matthew a mild sedative to calm him. Slowly, his cries subsided, but his eyes remained red, haunted by a pain I couldn't soothe. I stroked his hair. "Grandma's here, Matthew. I'm not going anywhere." But inside, I felt like I was plunging into an abyss. If Daniel was really... I couldn't even finish the thought. I just remembered Daniel, the last time I saw him, bringing me my favorite sweet corn cake, his bright smile. "Mom, take care of yourself, okay?" Now that smile felt like a distant, cruel memory, erased by the detective's words and Matthew's anguished cry. An hour later, the detective and another officer were in the room with their recorder and notebook. The young, tall officer sat by the bed, his voice soft but careful. "Matthew, can you tell us with your grandma here what happened?" I felt Matthew tremble in my arms, his thin shoulders tensing. He lowered his head, clutching his teddy bear like it was the only thing keeping him from sinking completely. I stroked his hair. "It's okay, sweetie. Just tell us. Grandma is right here." I tried to keep my voice calm, but inside I felt like I was teetering on a cliff's edge, terrified of what he would say, yet desperate to know the truth, no matter how agonizing. After a few agonizing minutes of silence, Matthew finally gave a tiny nod. A movement so small it broke my heart all over again. I held my breath, squeezing his shoulder, and listened to each of his weak, broken words, each one a shattered piece of his soul. "That night," Matthew began, his voice a trembling whisper, "it was raining really hard. I was playing with my Legos in my room, building a super tall tower that Dad said was the prettiest." He paused, looking at his bear, squeezing it tighter. And then the doorbell rang. So many times. He stopped again, lost in the memory. I got curious and went to see. Dad was looking through the peephole, and his face was... It was so tense. I'd never seen him like that. A chill ran down my spine. Daniel was always so calm, always shielded Matthew from his worries. What had terrified him so much? Matthew continued, his voice barely audible. Dad turned around and saw me. He ran to me, knelt down, and whispered, "Matthew, get under the bed quickly. Don't come out until I call for you. You hear me? But I was scared, but Dad pushed me to my room really fast. I got under the bed, and Dad even pulled down the comforter to cover it, so no one could see me. My heart ached, picturing my tiny 8-year-old boy, huddled in the dark, terrified, with no idea what was happening. Through a little gap in the comforter, Matthew whispered, I saw my mom come in, and she had a really tall man with her. His face was cold. He didn't say anything. He just stood there with his arms crossed behind my mom, Jessica, Matthew's mom, Daniel's ex-wife. I never thought she'd come back, not after everything. Matthew trembled, his voice breaking. My mom looked all around the room and asked, Where is Matthew? I got so scared. I thought she was going to find me. But my dad told her in a calm voice. He went to his grandma's when winter break started. I knew Dad was lying, but I didn't dare move. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks. The officer paused his writing, his expression serious, as Matthew continued. Then my mom started yelling at him. She was asking Dad for money. She said something about a debt that Dad had to pay if he didn't want trouble. But Dad shook his head. He wouldn't give her any money. He told her she had gone too far, that she'd bothered him enough. Hearing that broke my soul. Daniel had tried so hard to escape Jessica's destructive shadow, to build a new life for himself and Matthew. But she had come back, bringing pure devastation with her. Matthew stopped, breathing heavily, as if the memory was physically dragging him back to that night of terror. I rubbed his back. Take it easy, sweetie. Grandma's here. He took a deep, shaky breath and continued. Dad. My mom and the tall man, they started fighting really bad. My mom was screaming, and the other man got closer, saying something like a threat. I didn't hear it clearly, but I saw him push my dad. Dad stumbled back, and then he pushed him harder. Dad fell, and he hit his head on the corner of the table. There was a loud thud, and then red water started coming out. Matthew broke down, trembling uncontrollably, burying his face in my chest, sobbing. I saw Dad lying there, not moving. I wanted to come out. I wanted to call him. But I was scared. I was so scared. I hugged him with every ounce of strength I had, my own tears soaking his hair. The image of Daniel falling, lifeless, replayed in my mind like a horrifying movie. The police officer stopped writing, looking at me with profound compassion. This statement is incredibly important, Mrs. Helen, he said gravely. We are now investigating this as a homicide. Your grandson has been very brave. I just nodded, but inside I felt an emptiness that nothing could ever fill. Matthew kept crying, his sobs like knives twisting in my heart. I looked at the officer, my voice choked. Are you going to find her? Jessica. And that man? He nodded firmly. We will do everything possible, Mrs. Helen. I promise you. When they left, I just stayed there, hugging Matthew, the shadow of an unimaginable tragedy now fully upon our family. That night, after the police had left, sleep was a cruel joke. Matthew's soft sobs echoed in the room, each one a fresh stab to my heart. He'd move his lips, calling for his dad in a voice so faint I had to lean close to hear him. Every time, I'd gently wipe his face with a warm cloth, desperate to ease even a fraction of the pain he carried. But as I touched his cold skin, old memories, buried for years, came flooding back, hurting like salt poured on a wound that had never truly healed. I remembered Daniel in his 20s, his career just taking off, his eyes bright with hope for the future. The immense pride when he introduced me to Jessica, her smile radiant like the summer sun. Mom, this is Jessica, he'd said, his voice bursting with joy. She's going to be my wife. Jessica back then, she was a sweet girl, a little clumsy, but always trying to do things right. She'd blush when I taught her how to cook. I truly thought, yes, this girl is good. She's going to make Daniel happy. Our whole family adored her, not just for her warm smile, but for the way she looked at Daniel, like he was her entire world. Then Matthew was born, and it was like a new sun had risen in our family. I still remember walking him in the yard, Matthew nestled in my arms, his round eyes grinning at me. The neighbors would joke, Mrs. Helen, you look 10 years younger. And I would laugh, my heart overflowing. Daniel and Jessica were still happy then. They'd visit often, bringing Matthew and their stories of their new life. I believed it would always be this way, our small family, always full of laughter. But then everything started to unravel. I remember the call from Daniel. His voice was dull, tired. Mom, Jessica, She's gotten into some gambling trouble. I froze. I just couldn't believe that sweet girl could fall into something like that. The first time Daniel quietly sold his beloved car, the one he'd saved for years, just to pay off her debts. I saw him sitting in the yard later, his eyes red but still trying to smile. "Mom, I'll be fine. I just want to help her." I took his hand, desperate to say something, but I stayed silent because I understood. Daniel loved Jessica so much, he'd do anything to save her. But it didn't stop there. The second time, debt collectors started knocking on my door, making threats because Jessica couldn't pay. I had to empty all my savings. It was my retirement money, but I didn't hesitate. All I wanted was to protect my family. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Daniel choked out that night. I never thought things would get this bad. I hugged him, told him not to worry, that family supports each other. But inside, a cold fear began to take root. Jessica wasn't the girl she used to be. Every day she changed more. She became irritable, lashing out over the smallest things. I remember visiting once and finding Matthew huddled in a corner, his eyes red. Jessica had screamed at him just for spilling a glass of milk. "You're just as clumsy as your father," she'd shrieked. I ran over, pulling Matthew away, trying to calm her, but she just laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "He's my son. I know how to raise him." Those words were a dagger to my heart. Matthew didn't deserve her fits of rage. I looked at Daniel, and he was consumed. His eyes, once so bright, now only reflected exhaustion, helplessness. Many nights he'd call me, venting through tears. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. Jessica isn't the woman I fell in love with. I'm afraid she'll hurt Matthew." Hearing him broke my soul, but all I could do was offer comfort. "Son, if you need me, I'm here. I'll help you." Finally, Daniel made the agonizing decision to divorce and fight for Matthew's custody. The day the judge made the ruling, I saw him sigh in sheer relief, like an unbearable weight had been lifted. I felt it too. I truly believed that finally, father and son would have a quiet life, that Matthew would grow up with Daniel's unwavering love, free from the shouting and the crushing debts. But I was so wrong. Barely half a year later, Jessica returned, bringing with her a nightmare far, far worse. Matthew's horrifying story about that stormy night, about Daniel falling and lying motionless on the floor, it wouldn't stop replaying in my head. Jessica, the woman I once loved like a daughter, the mother of my grandson, had become a stranger, a cruel, monstrous person. Sitting in the hospital room's dim light, watching Matthew sleep, I heard his little sobs, his lips still moving, calling for his dad. That night, I made a silent vow. "Daniel," I whispered to the empty air, "I will get justice for you. I will protect Matthew no matter what it costs." The next morning, the sun streamed through the hospital window, but its warmth couldn't touch the chill deep within me. Matthew, sedated, looked calmer, but the indelible mark of pain was still etched on his small face. My phone vibrated. The precinct. The detective's voice, grave but firm. "Mrs. Helen, we have new information. Could you come to the station right now?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and whispered to Matthew, "Grandma will be back soon, sweetheart. Be good. The nurse will take care of you." I entrusted him to the kind young nurse I'd grown to know and rushed out, my mind a chaotic mess. On the bus, heading to the precinct, I stared out the window, seeing nothing but the horrifying image of Daniel falling, just as Matthew had described. I clutched my shawl, fighting back tears. When I entered the briefing room, the lead detective, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze, was waiting. He spread a large map on the table, pointing to several red dots around Daniel's house. "We have a new lead," he said, his voice confident. "A neighbor's security camera recorded a suspicious truck on the night of the storm." My heart pounded. I held my breath as he played the blurry, shaky video. It was poor quality, but I clearly saw a dark truck parked in front of Daniel's house. Under the dim streetlight, I could make out something long, covered with a tarp, in the back. Minutes later, the truck drove away. The detective showed another video. "We can't see the license plates clearly, they're blurry, but the model matches one used by a local loan shark gang." My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. Matthew's story, Jessica, the strange man, wrapping Daniel in a blanket, dragging him out of the house. That long thing in the truck. I didn't dare think further, but the pain was a sharp knife twisting in my heart. A young officer added, "We've checked traffic cameras. The truck appears at a couple of points, then disappears on the outskirts." We're coordinating patrols to search for it. I nodded, my head spinning. Are you sure this truck has something to do with it? I asked, my voice trembling. The detective met my gaze, his eyes full of grim determination. It's circumstantial, Mrs. Helen, but very important. We won't let any lead go. A faint glimmer of hope sparked within me, immediately choked by the terror of what they might actually find. After the meeting, the detective suggested I return to Daniel's house with them. I hesitated. I really didn't want to face that place again, but I knew I couldn't run. When we arrived, the yellow police tape still cordoned off the door, a stark reminder of the nightmare. The forensics team was inside, meticulously collecting samples, taking photos. I stood on the porch, my gaze fixed on that dried coffee stain in the living room, where just days ago I'd entered and found everything destroyed. That stain, those shattered cup pieces, felt like a fresh, unhealing scar in my mind. Suddenly, an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rose, approached, leaning heavily on her cane. She whispered, as if afraid of being overheard, "Helen, on the night of the rain, I heard a very loud fight at Daniel's house. Shouting, the sound of furniture moving. I wanted to call the police, but I was scared. Scared of getting into trouble." She lowered her head, her eyes filled with guilt. I took her hand. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Rose. Can you tell the police now?" She nodded, and I led her to the young officer. He wrote everything down carefully, thanked her, and promised to investigate further. I watched Mrs. Rose walk away, my heart heavy. I blamed myself, wondering if I had arrived sooner, if things would have been different. Before we left, the detective gave my shoulder a gentle pat. "We're going to find that truck, Mrs. Helen. Have faith." I nodded, but inside I wondered if I had any faith left to give. I left the house under a bright sun, but my heart was cloudy, heavy, as if on the verge of its own storm. A few days later, the precinct called again. The detective's voice was still grave, but now there was an undeniable urgency. "Mrs. Helen, we've located the apartment complex where Jessica lived. Do you want to come with us?" I looked at Matthew, who was sitting on the hospital bed, hugging his teddy bear, staring out the window with that lost, empty gaze. I didn't want to leave him, but I knew I had to go. If there was any clue about Jessica, about what happened to Daniel, I had to see it. "I'm on my way," I replied, my voice trembling. Again, I entrusted Matthew to the young nurse, caressing his hair, whispering, "Grandma won't be long, Matthew. Be good. I'll be right back." He nodded weakly, but his gaze remained fixed, as if he were in a place I couldn't reach. The alley leading to Jessica's apartment complex was a forgotten corner of the city, its peeling walls reeking of dampness and exhaust fumes. I walked alongside two officers, my steps heavy on the muddy path, my heart pounding not from effort, but from the raw fear of what I was about to uncover. When we arrived, the building's landlady, a sour-faced woman, sat by the entrance, smoking. Seeing the police, she sighed in annoyance, clearly used to trouble. "That Jessica," she said dismissively. "She left about 2 weeks ago, handed in the key and took off." Her words hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks ago. Exactly when Daniel disappeared. Exactly when his house became a chaotic crime scene. I stood frozen, clutching my shawl to steady myself. The young, tall officer asked, "When she left, was she carrying a lot of things?" The landlady nodded, stubbing out her cigarette. "Yeah, a huge suitcase. Looked like she was in a real hurry, like she was running from something. Even hired some guy to drive her away at night. Didn't say anything except to pay up." Just as we were about to leave, a strange man appeared at the end of the alley. Rough-looking, with a worn leather jacket and a face etched with scars. He approached the landlady, his voice hoarse. "Is Jessica still here?" "I need to see her urgently." The detective stopped him cold, his gaze like ice. "Who are you?" "What's your business with Mrs. Jessica?" The man stuttered, clearly caught off guard, trying to back away, but the young officer held him. After a moment of nervous fidgeting, he sighed, annoyed. "I'm Ramon," he grunted. "Her loan shark. Jessica owes me a lot of money. She swore she'd pay me back in 2 weeks, but now she's nowhere to be found." The police and I exchanged glances. No one spoke, but we were all thinking the same thing. The timing of Jessica's flight, the moment Daniel disappeared, and now this promise of a large sum of money. It all clicked into place, a terrifying, grotesque puzzle. The young officer muttered, almost to himself, "Why would she be so sure she'd have a large amount of money in 2 weeks if she was so desperate before that she had to seek out her ex-husband?" That question was a knife in my heart. A cold, cruel premonition grew inside me, making me tremble. There was something far darker behind all this, and I feared the truth was even more agonizing than I could possibly imagine. That night, I sat by Matthew's bed again, the dim hospital hallway light illuminating his sleeping face. He was still clutching that teddy bear, as if it were the only thing grounding him to this world. I took his hand, feeling the faint warmth of his thin fingers, trying to calm my racing mind. Then, like a lightning bolt in the darkness, a vague memory surfaced, and my heart lurched. Years ago, when Daniel and Jessica were still happy, Daniel had proudly shown me a life insurance policy. "Mom," he'd said with his radiant smile, "I want to protect my family. If anything happens to me, Jessica and Matthew will have nothing to worry about." The sole beneficiary at that time was Jessica. And now thinking about it, I realized Daniel never mentioned changing it after the divorce. That memory was a fresh stab wound. Could Jessica, with her mountain of debt and her desperate, cruel ambition, have set her sights on Daniel for that insurance money? I started to tremble uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from a horrifying premonition that was suffocating me. I looked at Matthew, saw him sob in his sleep, his lips still moving to call for his dad. I couldn't stay still another second. The next morning, my voice trembling, I called the detective. I just remembered something. Daniel had a life insurance policy, and Jessica was the sole beneficiary. Can you investigate that? He was silent for a moment, then replied, "Thank you, Mrs. Helen. That could be a key lead. We'll go to Mr. Daniel's house right now." I left Matthew with the nurse, begging her not to leave him alone, and went with the police back to Daniel's house. The yellow tape was still across the door, a chilling reminder. The forensics team had left, leaving the house cold and eerily silent. The detective led me and a young officer to Daniel's study, where he kept his important papers. They systematically searched through the file cabinet, checking every single folder. I stood there clutching my shawl, a tight knot in my stomach. After more than an hour, the young officer finally exclaimed, "I found it!" He held up a blue folder, opened it, reviewed it, then passed it to the detective. The detective glanced over it, then lightly tapped the folder against the desk, his voice laced with contained anger. "Here it is, Mrs. Helen, the motive." I looked at the paper. Jessica's name printed clearly in the beneficiary section. My horrible feeling was right. Daniel, out of love and responsibility, had unwittingly left a clear path for Jessica to exploit. I sank into a chair, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Why didn't you change it, Daniel?" I whispered, choked with grief. "Why did you give her this chance?" The detective placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice grave. "Mrs. Helen, if Daniel died in an accident, Jessica would receive all that insurance money. Enough to pay off her debts and live comfortably. This is likely why he disappeared." His words were like a hammer blow to my head. I clenched my fists, an immense burning rage growing in my chest. Jessica had become a monster, willing to take Daniel's life for money. I remembered her young face smiling happily next to Daniel, and I truly wondered, what had twisted her so completely? Ambition, desperation, or was she simply a person who had utterly lost her soul? That afternoon, back at the hospital, the phone rang again. It was the detective, his voice more urgent now. "Mrs. Helen, we've just received news from the investigation team. They found an abandoned frozen goods warehouse on the outskirts, a known hideout for that loan shark gang. We've already sent a special team there." My heart pounded like a war drum. "What do you suspect?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated. "We're not sure, but it's possible we might find some clue about Mr. Daniel." I sat by Matthew's bed, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't even hold a glass of water. That night, after Matthew had finally drifted into a fitful sleep, the phone rang once more. I answered, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The officer's voice was halting, choosing his words with agonizing care. "Mrs. Helen, we found a body. A man hidden in the frozen goods warehouse. We suspect it's Mr. Daniel." I collapsed. A choked sob caught in my throat. My world disintegrated, Daniel, my son. The person I loved most in this world, now just a body in a cold, forgotten warehouse. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, but only tears came. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice utterly broken. "We need you to come and identify him," he replied, his voice full of pity. "But please, prepare yourself." The next morning I went with the police to the morgue, a terrible fear clutching my heart. In the back of the patrol car, I clutched my shawl, staring blankly out the window, seeing nothing but Daniel's face. His smile. The way he'd tease me when I'd burn the sweet corn cake. "Mom, if you open a bakery, I'll be your first customer," he'd say, his voice so cheerful. Now that smile was just a memory, and I was about to face a truth I desperately didn't want to believe. When the car stopped at the morgue, I got out, feeling like I was moving through a dream. The young officer, the one who'd been with me through these past few days, put a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Helen, are you ready?" I nodded, though I knew deep down I would never be ready for this. The door to the cold room hissed open, and a frigid air reeking of chemicals hit my face, making me shiver violently. The white sheet covering the gurney was slowly pulled back. And there I saw him. Daniel. His face was pale, changed by time and death, but I recognized my son instantly. His thick eyebrows, his straight nose, the lips I'd kissed so many times when he was a baby. He was still my Daniel. I burst into tears, falling to my knees on the cold floor, only able to utter 2 words. "My son!" I wanted to touch him, to hug him one last time, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't lift them. The young officer helped me up, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We are so sorry, Mrs. Helen. Please sit." But I didn't want to sit. I wanted to scream at the world, demand to know why my son had been taken like this. When I finally managed to calm myself a little, the medical examiner, a grave-faced man, approached. He held a folder. The victim died from severe traumatic brain injury caused by a strong blow against a hard object. The time of death is estimated to be the night of the storm, 2 weeks ago. His words confirmed Matthew's horrifying account. That terrible night Daniel fell, lying motionless on the floor. I nodded, but every word felt like a knife sinking deeper into my heart. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure why I was thanking him. Perhaps for the cruel, undeniable truth. The police didn't stop. They intensified the investigation, scrutinizing the truck from the security camera footage. The detective called me at noon, his voice radiating grim determination. "Mrs. Helen, we found a blanket stained red and a woman's jacket in the truck bed. DNA results confirm the blood is Mr. Daniel's, and the jacket belongs to Jessica." I collapsed into a chair in the hospital hallway, my hands pressed against my chest. All the loose pieces now snapped into place, forming a picture of the crime so chillingly clear. Jessica. She had really done it. She had taken Daniel's life. Using the statement from Ramon, the loan shark we'd found at Jessica's apartment, the police quickly arrested the unknown man who had accompanied her that night. They invited me to the precinct to watch the interrogation through a one-way mirror. The man, with his rough appearance, initially denied everything. "I don't know anything," he grunted. "I just went with her." But when the police showed him the evidence, Jessica's jacket, the blood-stained blanket from the truck, his face went pale, and he started to sweat. The detective's voice was harsh. "You think we don't know? You helped her hide the body. Talk, if you don't want your sentence to be worse." Finally cutting a deal, he confessed Jessica's hiding place, an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. I stood outside that interrogation room, clutching my shawl, feeling the world spin. Jessica, the woman who once shared dinners with my family, who laughed with Matthew, was now a fugitive, a murderer. I remembered the last time I'd seen her before the divorce, her cold eyes. "Stay out of it, Helen. This is between Daniel and me." I'd tried to stop her, to tell her Matthew needed his mother, but she'd just laughed bitterly. Now, that laughter echoed in my mind, a terrifying warning I had tragically ignored. A few days after identifying Daniel's body, the news came. The police had arrested Jessica. They caught her in a small copy shop, desperately trying to forge documents to flee the city. The detective called me, his voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Helen, we have her. Do you want to come to the precinct?" I hesitated, looking at Matthew, who was drawing quietly on his hospital bed, still clutching his teddy bear. "No," I replied, my voice choked. "I don't want to see her. Just make sure she doesn't escape." But in the end, as the police led Jessica down the precinct hallway, I watched from a distance. Handcuffed, her face gaunt, her hair disheveled. I felt a complex mix of anger, yes, but also a strange, profound pity. Jessica, who had once been my daughter-in-law, Matthew's mother, had utterly destroyed her own life, and the lives of the people she claimed to love most. The trial was a sensation. It drew the press, the public, everyone. I sat in the front row, holding Matthew's hand tightly, feeling his small fingers tremble in mine. He hadn't wanted to come, but I gently convinced him. "Matthew, we have to do this for your dad. Grandma will be right here with you." He nodded, but his eyes were still full of fear. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy, taut like a rope about to snap. The prosecutor, a tall man with a sharp voice, stood and presented the evidence, piece by agonizing piece. He played the recording of Matthew's statement, my grandson's small voice trembling as he recounted that horrific night. Hearing it again squeezed my heart, and I hugged Matthew tighter as he buried his face in his bear. The prosecutor then displayed photos of the blood-stained blanket and Jessica's jacket found in the truck. DNA results confirm the blood belongs to the victim, Mr. Daniel, he stated, his voice cold and unforgiving. He projected the blurry security camera footage of the truck under the streetlights, carrying that long, tarp-covered object. Finally, he held up the life insurance policy folder, pointing to Jessica's name as the beneficiary. This, he declared, his voice echoing in the room, was the motive. The defendant planned a murder to collect the insurance money, pay off her debts, and live comfortably. I looked at Jessica in the defendant's box, her head bowed. At first, she tried to remain calm, avoiding everyone's gaze. But as the mountain of evidence grew, she began to tremble. Suddenly, she jumped up, shouting, "I didn't mean to kill him! I just wanted my money." Her voice broke, but no one in that room was moved. The prosecutor approached, his rebuttal chilling. If you only wanted money, why did you hide the body? You staged a fake accident scene and tried to collect on a life insurance policy. Jessica was speechless. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She turned to her accomplice, the rough man who was with her that night, and screamed, "It was him!" He pushed Daniel. The man instantly leaped to his feet, his face red with fury, pointing straight at her. "You were the one who planned everything. I just did what you told me. You told me to push him, to help you hide the body." The courtroom erupted. The crowd's murmurs swelled into a wave. I hugged Matthew, feeling his trembling body. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice tiny. "It was all my fault, wasn't it?" I stroked his hair, fighting back my own tears. "No, Matthew, it wasn't your fault. Your mom made a terrible mistake, and she's going to have to pay for it." But deep inside, I knew those words couldn't erase the wound in Matthew's soul. After hours of deliberation, the judge, a woman with a serious, unwavering gaze, delivered the verdict. Her voice was clear and firm. The defendant, Jessica, is found guilty of first-degree murder and fraud, and is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The accomplice is found guilty of accessory to murder and concealment, and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. When the sentence was read, I broke down, sobbing, hugging Matthew with all my strength. My tears weren't just for the pain of losing Daniel, but for the profound, searing relief that justice had finally been served. Matthew buried his face in my chest, crying uncontrollably. I could only rub his back, whispering, "It's over, my boy. Your dad can finally rest in peace." A few weeks later, I made the heartbreaking decision to sell Daniel's house for good. I couldn't bear to go back to that place, once filled with the laughter of my son and grandson, now tainted by such a painful memory. I took Matthew to live with me in my small town. I enrolled him in therapy, praying that the deep wounds in his heart would slowly, gradually heal. Every night, I sit by his side and tell him stories about Daniel, about his childhood, about how he always wanted me to be proud of him. "Your dad loved you so much, Matthew," I tell him, stroking his hair. "And Grandma does too." That night, I sat by the window, Matthew asleep in my arms. The moonlight streamed in, soft and comforting. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "My son, I promise you, I will raise and protect Matthew for you. Justice has been served." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but this time I felt a small, fragile sense of peace. As if Daniel were somewhere, smiling down at me. I hugged Matthew close, knowing that while the pain of losing my son would never truly disappear, I still had him. And I would spend the rest of my life taking care of him, just as Daniel would have wanted.